The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our next in the series that we've been doing this year of career webinars brought to you by your Alumni Association here at Vanderbilt. We're so excited you could join us and want to remind you that we are always sort of expanding our offerings for Vanderbilt Alumni Career Resources. So make sure to familiarize yourself with our website. My name is Celia Gregory. I'm happy to answer any questions via email and direct you to all of our different resources, most of which are web-based. But we love doing these live webinars so you can ask great questions of these presenters. And then, of course, we archive them on our website as well at vuconnect.com/expertadvice. So this, in its entirety, will be recorded and archived in coming days. So don't worry about it if you have to dip out early. But we will do questions at the end, however, to conserve time here. We want to jam-pack a lot of information into your lunch hour. And so feel free to type questions as you have them into the little side panel, and I'll sort of note those for Christy at the end. But we will, for sake of time, just make sure to get through as much content before about 12:35. I do want to introduce you to our resident expert on interviewing. So this is called Acing the Interview. And Christy Rob is a career development and transition consultant with Christy Rob Career and Lifestyle. She's also an executive recruiter at Plumlee & Associates here in Middle Tennessee. She has 10 years of experience in talent management, including individual and group career coaching, corporate recruiting, and agency recruiting. She also previously coached at Vanderbilt Center for Student Professional Development, so some of you may have crossed paths with her on campus years ago. Christy has an educational background in counseling psychology and has coached hundreds of individuals ranging from ages 18 to 72 and from entry to executive levels. I know that we have sort of a combination on the call today. She is a current subject matter expert in the field, having been published and quoted on multiple occasions for leading job search engines, especially Simply Hired. Christy, so excited to spotlight you and your expertise today, and take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Celia. I appreciate that wonderful introduction, and I'm glad to be here with all of you today. I hope you're enjoying the spring. I was just telling Celia that's so good for my soul. I look forward to discussing this topic with you today, sharing some great information. I hope it's helpful, and I look forward to your questions at the end. So let's dive in. This is me. Christy Rob, as Celia pointed out, I have my own career coaching practice, Christy Rob Career and Lifestyle. In that practice, I really focus on two major categories, one being traditional job search strategy, what's competitive today, everything from the nuts and bolts of resume development, cover letter development, also onto networking, uncovering opportunities, discovering opportunities, interviewing, and then closing the deal to get you that next best opportunity. And then I also work with folks in terms of career exploration. Sometimes folks come to me and say, I'm just stuck. I know I need to make a move, but I just don't know how, and I don't know what's most important to me moving forward. So we explore that together. Also, I am an executive recruiter with Plumlee & Associates, and Plumlee & Associates is owned by Martin Plumlee. We're a boutique firm, and by that I mean we have several areas of focus. We primarily focus on executive search, so we partner with corporate organizations to help them fill their hard-to-fill positions, and we work with talented candidates to help them get to their next best opportunity. And we also focus on executive coaching, career development coaching, and outplacement services. So that's just a little bit about us. Our topic today is interviewing. It's a topic I enjoy, and I always like to say that interviewing is something that can feel very unnatural, and we work hard to make it feel like a natural situation. And it's just important to remember that at the end of the day, it's just you and another person or a few other people trying to get to know each other a little better and trying to make a match. So going through the interview process is not always easy, but it certainly doesn't have to be a mystery. So today, we're going to break down some of the best practices that can help you study, prepare, feel confident, and really compete in an interview process. So let's go ahead and dive in. I'd like to start by talking about the parts of the interview that are pretty common today. More and more I am working with companies who want to start their interview process with a questionnaire. This probably happens after you've already submitted your resume in an application, or perhaps an external recruiter has submitted you to a company and they might email you a questionnaire. The biggest piece of advice I have about this portion of the interview is just to take it as seriously as you would any other part of the interview, including your response time. So if they request the questionnaire be returned to them by a certain time, certainly make that happen. If they don't request a certain time frame, at least get it in within 24 hours. And do your best and provide great quality on that questionnaire. I've certainly seen folks get screened out at this point because they thought it was maybe just a box to check off. So remember to take that seriously. Most of you are probably familiar with the phone screen. Often that happens with an HR representative with the company. The most important piece of advice with a phone screen, certainly, once again, prepare for it as you would any other part of the interview, but also it's harder to translate your energy when you're not in person. And I've seen folks get knocked out simply because they weren't communicating that same level of enthusiasm and energy as you sometimes can when someone can see your facial expression. So a great way to overcome that is to stand up while you're doing a phone screen. You just have more poise and you communicate more energy that way. Similar with the phone screen, video chat. One piece of advice I want to remember to throw out here is to make sure that your wherever you are in your room is free of background noise as much as possible. And sometimes it's hard to cover everything, but just do the very best that you can. I recently worked with a client who did a good job on her video interview. She thought she'd cleared her room of all background noise, and there was a fax machine that she hadn't used in years, and of course it received a fax during her interview. So what are the odds? But then, of course, it's just important about how you handle that. She apologized, stood up very quickly, turned off the fax machine, made a quick joke, and redirected her focus back to the interview. That's another important reason to make sure that you are dressed professionally, fully and professionally during a video chat. There's plenty of funny stories to go along with that, but you just never know when you might have to stand up. So don't do just the blazer and the pajama bottoms. There's the point there. Video chat is often conducted via Skype these days. So the company might provide you with a different tool or online software that they prefer, and it's just important for you to try that on your computer ahead of time. So remember all these little tips so they don't become unnecessary stumbling blocks along the way. There's also the recorded video interview, very similar. You might have a piece of software that's provided to you where the answer shows, or excuse me, the question shows up for you on the screen, and your answer will be recorded. That's just something to prepare as you would for any other piece of the interview. Certainly the in-person interview will talk a lot about the importance of follow-up. The interview is not over when you walk out the door, of course. We'll talk about the importance of follow-up. And I also want to make a point about the big picture of the interview. Certainly there is the all-important conversation that you're having with HR or with the hiring managers in the company. But remember that the interview process perhaps began when you made a new contact at a networking event and received several referrals into the company. It also matters how you interact with the receptionist at the front desk in the company. All of those little touch points combine to create your overall impression for the company. So just keep that big picture in mind. And I already made the point about response time, but I just can't emphasize enough how important it is to be responsive, respond as quickly as possible. If a deadline wasn't given, then a good fallback is to think within 24 hours you provide whatever information was requested. That communicates a tremendous amount about your actual commitment to and excitement about the opportunity. So that's just a breakdown of some of the parts of the interview you might encounter these days. Let's talk a little bit about types of interviews. Now we're getting into some of the good stuff. Certainly there are behavioral interviews. Many of you have probably heard of this. Behavioral interviews are based on the idea that your past performance may predict your future performance. So an example question would be, tell me about a time when you were leading a team and not everyone on the team was carrying their weight. What did you do and how did you handle it? And we'll talk about how to break down the answers to those kinds of questions in just a minute. There's also traditional interviews, questions like, what is your greatest achievement? What are your greatest strengths? We'll talk about preparing for that. And then there's something called the case interview, which is a little more specific, more unique, specific to certain industries, often might be presented as a case study, and they're trying to figure out how you think through a problem or how you think through a solution. We're really going to focus on behavioral interviews and traditional interviews today because they are the most common. So let's go back to that behavioral interview and look at this sample. Here's another good example of a behavioral interview question. Give an example of a goal you reached and tell me how you achieved it. That's a pretty big, broad question, and one of the big challenges about behavioral interviews is we don't really walk around every day with that kind of information in the forefront of our minds. So we'll talk a little bit about how to really prepare for these kinds of interviews, but the key in answering this question are the three main parts you want to include in your answer, and you can prepare for this as well. So give me an example of a goal you reached and how you achieved it. Let's take a look at a sample answer. The way you want to construct your answer, one good method is called the CAR method. There are several acronyms out there. You may have heard of CAR or STAR. They're really all getting at the same goal. And so let's take a look at CAR. Break that down into challenge, action, and result. So challenge, you want to set the scene. You want to help them understand the challenge you are facing and the story you're about to relay. Then you want to describe the action you took. Help them understand your role in the process. Sometimes people will start to talk about what the company did or what the team did. At the end of the day, they're talking to you, and they want to be able to envision you on their team. So help them understand specifically what role you played and what actions you took to address the situation. And then, of course, the all-important result. So make sure you describe to them what happened as a result of your actions. So we'll take a look at this example. Challenge. Due to the cuts in funding to our adult continuing education program, we face the daunting goal of drastically reducing our promotional budget without sacrificing our media presence in the community. Great challenge. Action. As a program director, so emphasizing this person's role, I researched alternatives to the effective yet costly course brochure, which was produced and distributed biannually to about 60,000 residents of our service region. And as a result, I was able to negotiate with 2 local newspapers to produce and distribute a new course brochure that increased distribution by 33% to 80,000 residents and decreased costs by 50%. So you won't always be able to have these great quantitative results, but whenever possible, it's great to have those in your back pocket. Even if a result is qualitative, you want to speak in terms of outcomes. That's an important key to the behavioral interview questions. You can see a resource that I put at the bottom of your screen there. You can take a look at that full article. Also, I know Celia is going to send out this presentation to you afterwards, and here are a few other resources, sites for you to review as you try to imagine all the behavioral interview questions that might be out there and practice some of the answers you would provide for them and some good strategies for answering them. And always keep that CAR method in mind. So let's talk a little bit about the traditional interview. For a lot of companies see several of these questions as outdated, and I tend to agree. However, you may still receive them, so it makes sense to prepare for them so you don't have to feel like a deer caught in the headlights. The first question that will probably be presented to you is some sort of a big opening question that is sometimes the hardest to answer. So we will break this down a little bit further, but one of those opening questions might be, tell me a little bit about yourself. Of course, you want to keep it professional and relevant to the position as much as possible. It's also important that this answer is about 60 to 90 seconds. In my experience of interviewing, one pitfall for candidates is when they haven't practiced this answer and they just go on and on and on. And you may think, oh, I can keep it short. Practice it. You'd be surprised, especially when you're in a little bit of a nerve-wracking situation, how you can tend to go on. Another good example of a question that I've used previously when I was an internal corporate recruiter is walk me through your resume and help me understand what brings you to us now. So there's a couple of parts to this question. The recruiter is looking to see, do you understand the impact of your experiences? Can you connect the dots and can you summarize your experiences for me? And then remember to tell me, why are you sitting in front of me now? What is it about us and this company that brings you to us now? So remember those key components for those opening questions. Then you go into some of the other traditional interview questions. They may ask, what is your greatest achievement? It's best when you keep this as a professional achievement. At the very least, you're able to connect it to a professional value. What are your greatest strengths? We've all heard this one. You want to provide perhaps 2 to 3 strengths that are related to the job, maybe provide a brief description between each one. What is your greatest weakness? Here's this question that most people hate, and it's understandable. So the key to tackling this question if you receive it, first of all, that you've prepared ahead of time and you're ready to answer this question. You do want to be genuine. You certainly want to be authentic. There's enough canned answers out there, and most employers can spot them from a mile away. You do want to use a weakness or an area for improvement or development that is not going to knock you out of the interview process. And you do want it to be something that can be improved upon, and you want to describe how you have worked to improve yourself in this particular area. So you don't necessarily want to go the route of saying, oh, I'm too passionate, I'm just too passionate. But sometimes folks might describe some of the challenges they face when tasked with delegating tasks to others, because they tend to want to do all of the tasks themselves. So you can describe that in a way that helps the interviewer understand how you've begun to address that, how you're going to address it further, and it still shows a great deal of responsibility on your part. So there's enough of a point about the weakness question. Where do you want to be in 5 years? This is a more complicated question these days because folks are changing jobs more frequently. We used to speak more in terms of just getting a job, and then we talked so much about having a career and a career trajectory that might have lasted for decades. We all know that that's fading away. People change jobs more frequently. It's really more about opportunities these days. So it's harder to answer this question for a lot of folks. But you can at least put some thought into how do you want to develop professionally over the next 5 years, perhaps in a way that could be applied to a few different settings, and you're focused on this one job in this company at this time, but at least speak to the professional development specifically that you'd like to achieve in the next few years. Also, another great question, if you receive this job, how will you begin? Of course, they're just looking to see, are you already envisioning yourself in the company? And how do you envision starting relationships and with people and investigating all the good duties of this role that we hope you'll come and fulfill? Keep in mind, hiring managers and recruiters, they all want you to be the one. They hope you're the one. They don't want a long, drawn-out interview process. So just keep that in mind as you're preparing for your interviews. And there's another helpful resource down there for you to view as well. So let's talk about that tell me a little bit about yourself question. It just makes sense to sit down and prepare. I've provided some prompts you can use, sort of some fill in the blanks as you prepare that for yourself. And here's an example of how you might answer this question. Succinct, direct, but carrying some key components. I'm a talent management professional combining experience in talent acquisition and career development coaching. I enjoy consulting with companies to help them design effective recruitment and employee engagement strategies, as well as coaching individuals to develop their professional brand, communicate their talents, and position themselves competitively in the marketplace. I've served in the corporate, agency, nonprofit, and higher education settings, and I'm excited to apply this expertise to the employees helping to drive growth at ABC Company. And certainly you want to probably start by writing down your answer to that question as you're practicing, and then practice it out loud because you will speak differently than you write, and just get that comfortable in your mind. The prompts that you can use, I am a, identify yourself with expertise, experience in certain areas. I've served in the industries of, mention a few strengths, and mention sort of the next steps, so your objective, which typically your objective is to get this job that you're pursuing at this time. So that's just one take on that question, and a good way to construct your own answer and practice as well. Keep in mind that a hiring manager must make a decision that can cost the company thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. So they're very sensitive to even the smallest details, like how nervous the job seeker is or spelling errors on their resume. Plus, if you're not prepared, even when you're the most qualified, it's very hard to prove why you in such little time. And this is such an important point. This was taken by Alan Carniol, who's the founder of InterviewSuccessFormula.com, on a Forbes article that you see there. I wanted to make this point because when you think about it, this is a very interesting scenario. Relatively speaking, you're spending a very small amount of time with one or several people And at the end of it, the two of you are potentially going to make a really big commitment to each other. So that's why maybe sometimes you feel like, wow, does it matter if this one little error occurred on my resume, or that I was maybe 5 minutes later than I should have been to an interview. All these little nuances really do matter. You're competing against others, and the hiring manager in such a short amount of time is trying to determine if they should bring you onto the team and spend a great deal of money and make a great commitment to you and invest in you. On the other hand, the same goes for you. You only have a short amount of time to make sure, is this a team I want to join? Is this a hiring manager that I really feel like I can look up to and who could be a good mentor for me? So just keep these items in mind. If you feel like a recruiter's being a little pushy, or if you feel like, man, this process is really taking a lot out of me, you're trying to make a big decision in a small amount of time. So here are some hot tips to really keep in mind. Certainly, you want to prepare. You may feel like, hey, I've done a billion interviews, or I've got this, I really know myself. Take the time to sit down and go through your information and research the company, and we'll talk a little bit more about the key items that should go into your preparation in just a minute. This goes without saying, but you want to dress professionally. When in doubt, go a little beyond what you think you should. Suits are usually great, with a few exceptions, but dress professionally. Be early, at least 10 to 15 minutes early, and what I often say, especially if it's a place where you haven't driven before, you might even get there ridiculously early. If you can spare the time, get there, find the location, and then maybe go and sit at a nearby coffee shop so you know you're not going to encounter any traffic. You know you'll be able to walk in about 10 to 15 minutes early. Certainly bring hard copies of your resume and paper to take notes, perhaps a notebook, a pad folio, something that looks professional, so you can take notes. Remember to turn off your phone. It's going to happen every now and then that you might forget, and then you just need to apologize quickly, of course. But turn off your phone or even leave it in the car. Remember to really listen to the questions that they ask and answer directly and succinctly. I can't just make the point enough to remind you to be direct and succinct in your answers so that you don't run on and the recruiter has a hard time breaking in to ask the next question. Definitely have your own questions prepared for the employer. We'll talk about some good questions to ask in just a minute. You really never want to find yourself saying, oh, no, thanks, I don't have any questions. You always want to have questions. There are always questions. And then the all-important task of following up, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So questions for the interviewer. Of course, you want to keep this focused on the company, the job, the task at hand. You've probably heard folks tell you before, don't bring up salary until they do. Don't bring up benefits or other perks until they do. This is another excellent opportunity for you to showcase your enthusiasm in the position and your knowledge of the position. So here are just a few examples of questions that are effective at this point of the interview, such as, what do you see as the greatest challenge facing the person in this role at this time? What are the next key initiatives for this team? What are the best ways that you see this role impacting the success of the company? What have you enjoyed about working with this company? And that can really give you some insight into the company and the culture by asking that question. It also helps you generate rapport with the interviewer. And then how is success measured in this role, which is excellent. It shows that you're focused on success, you're focused on outcomes, and you want to know how that's measured. So these are some great questions. There are plenty of other great examples online as well. So closing the deal. At the end of the day, we're not just doing this for fun. We're looking to get a new opportunity. We're looking to close that deal, and this is still a significant part of the process. I can say that a lot of folks seem to assume that the interviewer knows at every point in the game that you're still interested in the job, and that's not necessarily true. So don't underestimate the value of continuing to let the employer, the interviewer know that you're really excited and you still see a great fit between you and this role and you feel like you could really make a great contribution. So show the interviewer that you get the job. Often that could be, and by get I mean that you understand it. You can begin to see how this role makes an impact on the team. You understand how your experiences can really contribute and make an impact. And so some of that is just simply phrasing that for the employer, some of that will come across in the great, smart questions you're going to ask the employer. Emphasize that you would be excited to join the team and contribute to the mission. As I said, let them know you want the job. A great closing question, perhaps at the very end, is to ask, are there any other questions I can address for you that would help you see me contributing effectively in this role? Make sure you've covered everything, and make sure that you want to make sure that they feel confident that they have great knowledge about what you could bring to the table. There's another helpful resource for you to check out as well. Closing the deal, very important. So let's talk a little bit about how do you prepare for all this? How do you focus? How do you deal with nerves? Back to the behavioral interview questions. Like I said, it can be so challenging because you're so busy working at your previous jobs. You're probably not sitting around thinking, oh, I did this great thing today. This is a great achievement. I'm going to write it down and I'm going to remember it. So that's typically not how we operate. So it's a great project as you prepare for an interview to create a list of accomplishment stories. It's ultimately these stories that you will most likely use to answer behavioral interview questions. And you can't really predict what questions you'll receive, but to the extent that you know about the opportunity, you can begin to imagine what questions would be most relevant. So put your focus there and create as extensive a list as you can of accomplishment stories. And remember to include stories where you were set up for success and you succeeded, and stories where you faced a great challenge or a last-minute challenge, or you were sure you were going to miss your deadline. Think of all of those unique stories where something presented a great challenge or where you were set up for success and succeeded, and create that accomplishment story list. Review these common questions, including relevant behavioral interview questions. Go ahead and review those questions and practice. Definitely study your resume and study your experience. Again, we think, oh, I can recall everything that I've done. This is a very unique setting. Go ahead and study your resume. Think about those key stories. Think about where you've been and how the dots connect between your different positions in the past so that you're prepared to communicate that. You also want to research the company. I know that everyone says this. I'm just going to really emphasize this for you as well. I've seen so many people get knocked out because of the interview process because they didn't do enough research on the company, or they didn't seem to be able to interject comments or questions in the interview conversation that showed that they'd really done some good research on the company. You can certainly do that by, start with the company website, read the About Us section, comb through as much of the website as possible. You might take a look at press releases. You might Google the company. You might go on Glassdoor.com to get a little more information. Take it all with a grain of salt on Glassdoor.com. Sometimes there are complaints there, and it's human nature to complain a little bit more than praise. So just take it all with a grain of salt, but it can be a great place to research the company as well. Most companies have a LinkedIn page that you can review. You just want to get a feel for not only what they do, but who they are and what they're about. At the end of the day, they're going to be looking for your fit with the company as well. It would be great if you were knowledgeable about that. Remember to prepare those questions for the interview and prepare ahead of time. Don't expect you're going to come up with these questions. And also be thoughtful as you're listening in the interview as well that you do not ask a question that's already been covered in the interview. So prepare perhaps 6 to 10 questions so you have maybe 2, 3, or 4 that you're prepared to ask when the time comes in the interview. You also want to give yourself time and space to exhale, relax, and arrive early as much as possible. Sometimes your schedule will allow more than others, but like I said, give yourself the time to get there early as you care to get there, so that traffic is not an issue, so that you don't accidentally miss an exit perhaps. If you do and you turn around, that's not going to make you late because you left early enough. It just gives you a chance to exhale, relax, take in your surroundings, announce yourself about 10 to 15 minutes early, and then probably sit down and prepare your mind for the interview. Just give yourself that great chance to succeed. Also, like I said, remember that an interview is just 2 people trying to make a match. Remember to test any interview software tools ahead of time. And as much as possible, practice. Practice with friends, with mentors. When you're on your own, practice out loud to yourself as well. Those are all great ways to set you up for success walking into the interview. I thought I would also take a minute, if I had time, just to share a couple of really quick, funny stories. So in my interviewing experience, in terms of too much confidence, I remember interviewing someone that came in and I knew they were trying to showcase their confidence. And that's what they were trying to get across. But they weren't quite professionally dressed enough. They came in, they sat down, they leaned back, they put their feet on the table, and at that moment they were not going to get the job. So just remember, it's about being professional and respectful and being poised. Certainly, I've been in an interview where a candidate's phone went off. We all do our best. It might happen every now and then. When that happens, of course, you just apologize quickly, turn the phone off so it won't ring again, and redirect your focus to the interview. I had one interview where someone's phone rang and they apologized, and they actually answered the call and said, hang on just 1 minute to me. So that wasn't going to work in the interview process either. If it should happen that something makes you late to the interview, and of course you try as much as possible to not let that happen, just be thoughtful, respectful, apologize. You might say, this is uncharacteristic and I apologize, I respect the demands on your time. You don't want to say something like, I was out late last night and my head's a little scattered, which is a recent true story. And again, I've made the point too about in your answers, you want to be direct and succinct and practice so you don't end up telling a long story that trails off into several other stories that's not relevant to the position. So those are just some funny stories, but also some helpful reminders to keep in mind. After the interview, you know that follow-up is so important. One thing I've heard so often is that folks will just start to feel insecure. It's understandable. You have no idea all the variables that go on behind the scenes. Some of them are in your control to some extent. Many of them are not. Maybe another person on the team went on vacation. They don't want to make a decision until that person gets back. Maybe they're discussing putting the position on hold. Maybe they have an internal candidate they need to interview. This could have nothing to do with you, and you could still very much be in the running. But it's still, you want to be the owner of persistence in this process. So follow up, certainly send a thank you note within 24 hours to each member as much as you can that spoke to you from the company. And then a good rule of thumb is to follow up about once a week to inquire as to the status of your candidacy, and also give yourself that chance to emphasize your excitement about the position once again. And perhaps if you've reached out 2 or 3 times, sometimes 3 strikes you're out, everybody draws their line somewhere, that might be where you draw your line. But don't think that if a recruiter or an employer says, hey, I'll get back to you in the next couple of days, if they don't think it's over, and don't think that your tasks are over. You still follow up. You still own the process for yourself. And that is everything that I have to share for today. I've certainly enjoyed sharing this information with you and presenting it to you, and I hope it's helpful, and I am happy to turn it over for questions.
Awesome, Christy. Thank you so much. That's a tall order to cover so much information in 35 minutes about something that is really something we need to keep top of mind lifelong. As you touched on, even if we start out on a career path, you never know when opportunities are going to become available to switch gears, and whether folks on this call today are actively interviewing, I know some of you are, or you're just trying to remember these best practices to be prepared if you have a sudden opportunity. We're really glad that you joined us today. So we did get a couple questions early on, so I'm going to pitch those in the order they've been received. First of all, you mentioned Skype interviews, Christy, and somebody said for video chat, would you have any tips for trying to look at the interviewers sort of in the face instead of down at the screen, like webcams can sort of look awkward?
Yes, I am familiar with that, and I agree that that can be frustrating. It's really just a matter of playing around with it and practicing ahead of time. You know, it's a great idea to practice Skype with a friend so that you get it set up exactly as you can. And I just realized, I think what you're also saying is that maybe your eyes are being distracted because you can see yourself. I'm not sure if maybe that's what the question was getting at as well. I think as much as you can prepare and help yourself stay focused and just really remind yourself that this is as if you are sitting across the table from this person. And eye contact is important. So it's a matter of just practice and preparation, and definitely practice the Skype with a friend so you can get used to that and get used to focusing on the right area and feel comfortable with the position of your webcam. It's just on setting it up ahead of time.
Awesome. Practice makes perfect. Specific tactics for internal interviews. So if you're trying to go for a promotion within your own organization, are there any tips that are specific to internal interviewing?
Yes. So depending on where you are in this process, it's great if you've already identified some key internal mentors for yourself in the company. If you haven't, begin thinking about who would be a good advocate for you, official or unofficial, just people that you look up to and that give you praise and perhaps you're good partners in the company. And that may or may not be your direct boss immediately, but someone you feel comfortable tapping on the shoulder and saying, you know what, I'm really thinking about my next steps in the company and I would really love to stay within the company. I'd like to start a conversation about where I might best contribute in the company, and bounce those ideas off of a good internal mentor. It could be someone who's your peer but who's been there a little bit longer, or again, it could be more of a dotted line supervisor, and just start that conversation to give yourself some good ideas. And then at some point, it would be excellent, assuming you have a good relationship with your immediate supervisor, to schedule some time and say, I'd like to talk a little bit about my career path in the company. I have some ideas and I see some areas for opportunity in the company. Could we just sit down and brainstorm together for perhaps 20 or 30 minutes? And it's hard for supervisors to turn that down. So you'll just prepare for that conversation and sit down and really have some good open-ended questions and perhaps a few ideas to present about how you might move forward in the company. And that's a great way to show how invested you are in the company and how much more committed you are. And in terms of those internal interviews, once you actually get to the interview, you prepare just like you would for any other interview, but you have the benefit of really knowing the company and knowing their pain points and knowing the opportunities for success, so you can really leverage that.
Excellent. We had a couple people ask about the thank you note process, and I will let you answer this, even though I think I have a hunch of what's the answer. Is email an appropriate method for sending a thank you note, especially given that a mailed thank you note might take 24 hours or more to get there?
Right, and it's such a good question, and it's asked often, and there's so many different opinions flying around. And so the first answer is, it depends, so how about that? But let's break it down. The things you want to consider is the timing of your response. And you're right, an email is going to get there before snail mail will. Not everyone is in agreement with this opinion, but I still really like the idea of sending an immediate, as in within 24 hours, an immediate email thank you that's short, sweet, and to the point, maybe 2 or 3 lines. Really appreciate your time today, respect the demands on your time, enjoyed learning more about the company, looking forward to the next steps. Something along those lines that's quick, and we'll get to them quickly. And then even later on, especially if you feel like you've just been through the main interview or even the final interview in the process, perhaps sitting down and writing a slightly longer handwritten note to 1 or 2 of the key folks in the process. You can still follow up with that handwritten note behind the email. The danger in sending a snail mail note is that if they need to make a decision before that snail mail will get there, that's something to consider. Also, I don't know about all of you, but I'm starting to experience in larger companies, the mail doesn't always get to the right person in a timely fashion. So you just have less control over it. I think you can't go wrong with email and snail mail. You can't go wrong with expressing additional gratitude. So I hope that kind of covers the bases in just a quick 60-second blurb.
No, that's great. I would resonate that both is often the answer instead of worrying about which is appropriate. Yeah, I've never been off-put by somebody who showed extra enthusiasm or extra gratitude. I would certainly second that, Christy. Just proving the point that we have folks from all different sort of industry positions and points in their career. We had several questions I'm hoping you can sort of fire away answers to, Christy. As far as maybe interview tips pertaining to folks re-entering the workforce after extended time away, maybe raising children, maybe involuntary unemployment, but how do you address those gaps of time on your resume when you're in an interview situation? I'll pitch that one first.
Okay, so you said fire away. So yes, I'll be thoughtful about timing. So it's going to be different for every person, but anything that you did do during that time or that gap, for lack of a better word, you want to leverage that and describe how it added value to your professionalism today. Did you teach a couple classes? Did you do some consulting? Did you volunteer anywhere? If you're facing that challenge and you haven't started doing something that you can speak to in the present right now, I would dive into something so you can speak to it. And then you want to put all your focus on the time at hand that is now, the job that is now, the company that is now, and how you can connect the dots between yourself and that company. Anything you can do to still showcase your professionalism and your relevance in the marketplace, even if it means taking a quick class, if it means brushing up on Excel. There are so many quick and easy ways to brush up on some of those skills that you can communicate that can help you be as relevant and competitive as possible now.
Excellent. And in keeping with that, what about interviewing for folks that are trying to change industries and maybe, mid-career industry change?
Sure, and of course, I'm sure a lot of folks have heard folks talk about transferable skills. So sit down and do your homework and uncover as much as you can about all the skills you've developed so far and how they would translate and transfer into a new industry. Of course, that's going to depend on the specific circumstances as to what those transferable skills are. But the more you can use that and leverage that to showcase your understanding of the current position, it just puts a little bit of more of the ownership on you to translate those key skills for the employer, because that might be a gap that they have. They might see you as a great professional, but help me understand how your experience in banking could help us in this nonprofit, or whatever the scenario is. It's picking up on those transferable skills and doing enough of your homework so you can really communicate how you would connect those dots. And in all of this, including the gaps in employment, the changing the industries, networking is going to be key. Networking is going to get you beyond the old resume submission, usually every time. That's just so important.
Excellent. Is there a proper way or a best way to address layoffs? So if you were let go from your last position from company layoffs.
Yes, and unfortunately that is so common today. So many folks have been impacted by a company restructuring or some sort of layoff, at least once in their career. So one response I want to provide for that is to say, just remember you're not alone. It's not uncommon. Recruiters and hiring managers have heard of these instances many times, and they've probably had to participate in them before. But it is important to have some sort of an exit statement or exit strategy, sometimes they're called, prepared, so that you can answer that question. And you just want it to be short, sweet, to the point, kind to your previous employer, and really focused on your forward movement. What they want to hear in your answer to the question, why did you leave your last employer, and if the answer is that it was a layoff, they want to really know that you're prepared to move forward. That's the biggest thing. Sometimes folks may exhibit hard feelings or a sense of feeling still stuck in their difficult feelings about their previous employer and previous situation, and that just communicates to this employer that you're not ready to move forward. So it's just most important to communicate, the company was purchased by a new parent company. They brought in new executives, and they had a lot of their own staff, so some of the staff became redundant, and they decided to let go of our entire team. Unfortunately, I was impacted by that shift, and I'm really looking forward to using this opportunity to apply my skills to a new company in this way. So if that makes sense, just really redirecting it to the future.
And keeping it positive. Awesome. We have time for one more question that's already come in. Thanks again, folks, for joining us. Pertaining to making sure to get that thank you note out ASAP, how do you request contact information if you're being interviewed by several people? Is it okay to say when you get there, or maybe departing, let me have your business card? What's the appropriate way to ask for that or make sure you get it before you leave?
Yes, so you can say, if you feel comfortable with it, use your own judgment call in the conversation. If you feel comfortable saying, may I have your business card, I'd like to send you a follow-up note. In some cases, you might have a key HR representative that's kind of been your contact the whole time. If you just don't feel like you're in a spot to ask for everyone's information, you might follow up with her, or him. You probably have their contact information, and you might follow up and say, hey, I'd really like to send a note to these folks. Would you mind sharing the email addresses for and list the people? You don't want to stalk anyone on LinkedIn, but that is another resource to find folks in some cases. But I would say ask the HR representative, or it is completely fine to ask me to have your email address or your card so I can follow up with a nice note.
Awesome. Well, it is exactly 12:45 Central Daylight Time, so thanks for everybody that could join us. And I want to remind you, you have Christy's information here and her 2 websites, but also from our career coaching page on our alumni career website is a little blurb about Christy and the services she offers and sort of her expertise, which covers a lot, especially interviewing, having been both a coach and a recruiter and seeing all these sides. I know that she would love to spend time with those of you one-on-one that require that extra assistance, and so there are methods of contacting her from that site. And remember, you can revisit this webinar once it's archived on our website, and I'm going to send you the slides even sooner, which will have these links live, so you can keep that as a handy resource. We do have a couple more webinars scheduled for later this year, so please stay tuned to our website and make sure your email address is updated so you always get notice of these opportunities. Go into VU Connect and make sure you're all square there so you know what's coming up and can register. And Christy, thank you again so much for spending time with us today. We hope that everybody will get some feedback so we can continue to improve upon these offerings for career services at Vanderbilt. And again, check your email, and I will be sure to reach out with you later today.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it. Everyone have a good day.
Thanks. Bye-bye.